Look at her. She thinks she's above everyone else. The businessman's mocking laugh skittered down the aisle just as the fuselage shuddered. Trays rattled overhead, bins creaked, and the plane dipped hard enough to make seatbelts bite into hips. Most people gripped their armrests with white-knuckled panic. One woman didn't. Rachel Moore sat very still, a plain gray sweater folding into an economy seat, like she was part of the upholstery, her breathing a slow metronome. She wasn't ignoring the chaos. She was pacing it. 4 counts in through the nose, 6 counts out. The rhythm steadied her pulse, and by osmosis, steadied the tiny world around her. A little girl beside her, 6 maybe, clutched a threadbare bunny as if it were a life vest. Tears streaked her cheeks in shaky rails. Rachel opened her eyes long enough to offer a small nod. Not a smile, just a promise. The girl's sobs thinned to hiccups, then to breath that tried to match Rachel's cadence. A tailored suit 2 rows up stood chin-tilted fear dressed as bravado. "You're just sitting there like this is a game. Think you're tougher than us." His hands trembled, betraying what his voice tried to hide. "Sit down," Rachel said. Not a bark, not a plea. A low instruction with the finality of a latch clicking shut. He obeyed before he knew he'd moved. The little girl's mother hair in a weary bun leaned over. "Thank you," she whispered, voice snagging on relief. "She's been crying since takeoff." "You calmed her." Rachel's answer was a fractional nod. She slid her canvas tote deeper under the seat with precise care, as if shelving tools instead of a bag. The aircraft steadied. The intercom crackled. The pilot's voice, Midwestern edges calm, but stretched thin, promised they were leveling out, that everything was under control. The exhale that followed was collective, hopeful, fragile. Rachel's eyes closed again. She wasn't meditating. She was mapping, listening to the plane the way a mechanic listens to an engine angle of pitch trim, changes the cadence of wheels under the floor, the distance between flight attendant footsteps. Somewhere forward, the co-pilot's voice murmured to ATC buried by the door. Somewhere aft, a service galley latch clicked. Somewhere close, the girl's breath evened into the soft tide of trust. She measured both. The businessman's swagger shrank into the rectangle of his seat, and Rachel, anonymous and unbothered, held the center of a room that didn't want to admit it needed a center. A flight attendant rolled by name tag Clara, catching the light. She checked belts, smiled with professional warmth, kept moving. The little girl's mother finally unclenched her jaw. "Where are you headed?" she whispered, a small human bridge. Rachel didn't answer. Not yet. Her attention had shifted forward to a difference in the air that had nothing to do with weather. The cabin door slammed open. 5 figures in black masks spilled into the aisle, boots thudding, pistols up, like punctuation marks that end all sentences. The lead man's cap shadowed his eyes. His hand seized Clara by the arm and wrenched her toward the front. The scream that rose from the cabin wasn't one voice, but many, fear braided into a single rope. Rachel didn't rise. She didn't flinch. She inhaled. And the fate of Flight 278 hung on the length of that breath. The aisle split wide with fear. Passengers clutched each other, their voices dissolving into sobs. Clara, the flight attendant, stumbled forward, the barrel of a pistol pressed so hard against her temple, her skin blanched white. The leader barked into a handheld radio, $50 million. An armored vehicle. A clear runway. 1 hour, or she dies. His voice was gravel and gunpowder echoing against thin aluminum walls. Chaos bloomed. A woman shrieked. A man fell to his knees, whispering rapid-fire prayers. The little girl beside Rachel buried her bunny against her chest, eyes wide and drowning. And through it all, Rachel's breathing never broke rhythm. Passengers noticed. And that was dangerous. "She's too calm," a hoodie-clad young man hissed, pointing. His friend ducked lower but didn't disagree. The businessman leaned forward, his face red, voice sharp enough to cut. "What are you, some kind of plant? You're freaking everyone out." Rachel's eyes flicked to him, steady, unflinching. "I'm not with them," she said, voice quiet but with the finality of a locked vault. "But fear is hungry." A man clutching a photo of his children choked out, "You're not even trying to help. What kind of person just sits there?" His anger had less to do with Rachel than with the photo trembling in his hand. Rachel's eyes softened. She leaned just slightly toward him. "Your family's waiting for you. Stay calm." The man blinked, his breath snagging. He gripped the photo tighter but sank back into his seat, confusion loosening his rage. Rachel's sleeve shifted just enough to reveal her smartwatch. Her finger brushed the screen, tapping in a pattern that looked like an idle fidget. It wasn't. In a dim control room thousands of miles away, a blinking dot appeared on a screen. Agent Moore is in position, a special ops commander, said, his jaw tight. A team scrambled around him, pulling up maps of Kansas airspace, cross-checking FARA protocols. The irony was sharp. While passengers on the plane were accusing Rachel of apathy, an entire task force on the ground was hanging on her every move. Back in the cabin, Rachel leaned slightly toward the little girl's mother, her whisper low, almost private. They need leverage. They won't fire yet. The mother's eyes widened. How do you know that? She asked. Rachel's gaze stayed forward. She didn't answer. But the hoodie kid overheard. Stop talking, he snapped, his panic curling into hostility. You'll get us all killed. The leader stalked the aisle, gun digging deeper into Clara's temple. His men spread out, one blocking the cockpit door, another stationed near the galley, two prowling the aisles. Their boots struck the carpet with military rhythm. Rachel's mind cataloged every step, distance between men, grip on the weapons, the tension in their shoulders. Years of counter-terrorism training flickered like overlays across her vision. She could hear her instructor's voice from Quantico drills. Control the room, not the fight. But to the passengers around her, she was still an enigma, an insult to their fear. She's jinxing us, a flashy man with a gaudy watch bellowed, pointing at Rachel as if that finger could redirect his terror. Her attitude's going to get Clara killed. Murmurs of agreement swelled a tide of resentment. Rachel tilted her chin barely. Panic won't save her, she said. The words were even, but they cut through noise like a bell. For a moment, silence pooled in the cabin. The terrorists themselves hesitated, their leader's eyes flicking toward Rachel. Something about her composure carried weight. One of his men leaned close, whispering, "How's she know protocol?" The cabin turned hotter with suspicion. "Shut up," someone in the back cried. "She's going to make it worse." A flight attendant, not Clara, but another, edged close, whispering to Rachel in a voice meant to scold quietly. "You need to stop talking. You're putting us at risk." Rachel met her eyes calm as ever. "I'm helping," she said softly. Something in her tone rooted the attendant to the spot. Meanwhile, the little girl's mother studied Rachel differently now, her grip tightening on her daughter's hand. She hadn't just seen calm, she'd seen calculation. The leader's radio cracked again. 10 minutes or she dies. Clara whimpered, her knees buckling. The gun pressed harder against her temple. Passengers wailed louder. Someone shouted, "Just give them what they want." In the blur of panic, the crowd's judgment funneled like a spotlight onto Rachel Moore. And Rachel. She didn't move. She was still counting breaths, because the countdown had already begun. 5 minutes, the leader roared, shoving Clara so hard she nearly fell. His voice shook the cabin louder than the engines. Passengers screamed prayers, tumbled out of trembling lips, and fear pressed against the walls like another layer of air. Rachel's gaze never left the man's hands, his grip on the gun, the twitch in his trigger finger, the way his shoulders bunched under the black fabric of his jacket. Every detail was data. Every breath she took was calculation. Beside her, the little girl clung tighter to her bunny. Her mother's eyes darted between Rachel and the armed men, her face pale but dawning with realization. She leaned in close enough to whisper, "You've done this before, haven't you?" Rachel didn't answer. A single nod was all she gave, small enough to hide, heavy enough to confirm. The passengers' resentment boiled. A young woman with glasses fogged by tears snapped, "Why are you so calm? Don't you care?" Her words cracked mid-sentence, fury wrapped around terror. Murmurs of agreement echoed. To them, Rachel's stillness wasn't courage, it was betrayal. Rachel turned her head just enough. "I care," she said quietly. Her tone was neither defense nor apology. It was a statement sharp as steel but soft at the edges. The woman's anger faltered, her hands trembling as she adjusted her glasses, eyes wet and uncertain. The leader paced, his boots grinding into the carpet. His men shifted restlessly, one watching the cockpit, another prowling the aisle, their weapons catching the dull glow of overhead lights. Years earlier, in a dusty training facility outside Virginia, Rachel's instructor had pressed his palms together in demonstration. "Control the room, not the fight," he'd told them. She had practiced until her muscles memorized the angles, wrist locks, pressure points, disarm flows. Now in this narrow fuselage, 30,000 feet over the American Midwest, those drills resurfaced, not as memory but as instinct. The leader's voice snapped the air again. 3 minutes. He yanked Clara upright, pressing the muzzle harder against her head. Clara's breath came in broken gasps, her name tag tilted sideways, her shoes squeaking on the thin carpet. The businessman's sweat slicking his temples, glared at Rachel. "You're useless. Just sitting there." His words, once smug, now dripped with venom and fear. Rachel didn't look at him. Her jaw tightened for the first time, but her eyes stayed locked on the gunman. "Do something," another passenger cried, a young mother clutching her toddler so tightly the child whimpered. "You're acting like you don't care if we die." Rachel's head turned slightly, her gaze steady but gentle. "I'm watching," she told her. Her eyes flicked to the toddler, and he fell quiet in his mother's arms. The woman froze, torn between fear and the sudden calm that her child mirrored. The murmurs surged again, a tide of panic, twisting into blame. "She's jinxing us. She's with them. She's making it worse." Rachel didn't defend herself. She didn't need to. Every word thrown her way was noise. Every second was a countdown. Her hand brushed the zipper of her tote. Inside, under worn fabric, lay small folded tools. Zip ties, a photo of her at 18, with her father in uniform, both smiling in the sun. She didn't look at it now, but her fingers lingered there. A reminder. A tether. The leader's patience snapped. He shoved Clara forward again. 2 minutes. The cabin broke, some sobbing, some screaming, some collapsing into their seats like lifeless weight. Rachel stood. The motion was smooth, deliberate, impossible to misinterpret. She rose like someone who had been waiting for this precise second. Her voice carried steady across the cabin. "Your biggest mistake," she said, "was letting me sit here too long." The leader spun his gun, snapping toward her. "What did you say?" In that fraction of a heartbeat, before anyone could stop her, the tide of Flight 278 shifted. The air cracked. In 2 swift steps, Rachel closed the distance between her and the leader. Her hands snapped up, twisting the pistol from his grip before the trigger could break the silence. The weapon clattered to the floor, and her elbow crashed against his jaw. He collapsed before his body knew it had fallen. Gasps tore through the cabin. For a moment, no one breathed. Then Rachel moved again, a blur of precision. The scarred henchman lunged, gun raised. She struck his wrist with a sharp pivot, the pistol flying free, his arm useless as he cried out. Before he could recover, she drove a heel into his ribs, sending him crumpling against the seats. The stocky one charged his size, a wall of threat. Rachel slipped sideways faster than his momentum, her knee bearing into his stomach. Air whooshed out of him as he crashed to the floor, wheezing. 2 more terrorists left. One swung his weapon wildly, panic sharpening his fear. Rachel's hand darted forward, a jab to his throat, silencing him mid-yell. He dropped his gun, clutching his neck as his knees buckled. The last one faltered, his bravado evaporating as he aimed at her. Too slow. Rachel's kick folded him in half before he could squeeze the trigger. In less than 20 seconds, the aisle was littered with groaning bodies and scattered weapons. 5 men who had stormed the plane like gods of fear now lay broken at the feet of passengers who had once despised her calm. Clara dropped to her knees, gulping air, her eyes wide with shock. The gun pressed against her head was gone, but the imprint of its cold steel lingered in her trembling. She looked at Rachel, tears streaking down her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. Rachel didn't answer. She was already moving. She kicked the weapons down the aisle, collecting them in a pile, then reached under her seat. From the tote, she drew out zip ties, ordinary plastic restraints that looked so out of place on a commercial flight, yet fit perfectly in her hands. One by one, she bound the wrists of the unconscious men. The passengers gawked, their mouths open, their voices trapped in throats that still remembered fear. The hoodie kid who had accused her earlier stammered, Who are you?" The businessman, once smug and certain, now sat pale and silent, clutching his armrests like they were the only things keeping him upright. Rachel brushed a strand of hair from her face, tugged her sweater straight, and sat back down as if the last half minute had been nothing more than turbulence. The cabin vibrated with disbelief. The energy shifted from hostility to awe, yet no one dared speak too loudly. Even Clara, shaking but alive, could only whisper her gratitude again, softer this time. A man in a polo shirt stood shame thick in his voice. "I'm sorry," he said to Rachel. "I thought you were—" He trailed off, unable to finish. The weight of judgment hung heavy in the silence. Rachel didn't look at him. She adjusted her bag, calm, as if resetting for a new mission. The engines hummed lower, the beginning of descent. Through the oval windows, runway lights winked against the night, stretching like a promise. And then, with a slam of hydraulics, the cabin door opened. Armed special forces poured in, boots pounding the floor, weapons ready. They froze when they saw the scene: 5 terrorists, already subdued, wrists bound, weapons neutralized. At the center of it all sat Rachel Moore, calm as the moment the story began. The commander, tall with a gray buzz cut, locked eyes with her. His voice rang with both respect and certainty. "Agent Moore," he said, saluting. "Outstanding as always." Passengers gasped. Some clapped, others cried, the sound swelling until it filled the cabin like a tide of relief. Rachel only leaned back in her seat, the hum of the engines drowning applause, her bag tucked under her arm. For her, it was just another mission completed. For everyone else, it was the night their judgment turned into awe. The applause rippled through the cabin, uneven at first, then swelling into a wave of relief and shame. Tears streaked faces that only minutes ago had been twisted in anger at the woman who refused to panic. Now those same eyes followed her, with reverent mouths whispering thanks they hadn't thought they'd live to give. The man in the tailored suit, the one who had pointed at Rachel earlier, with his gold chain gleaming, stood frozen, his bravado hollowed out. He couldn't meet her eyes as the special forces marched past. The businessman with the Rolex tugged his sleeve down to hide it, as if shrinking the symbol of his arrogance. And yet the little girl in the aisle seat didn't look away. She reached for Rachel's hand, small fingers wrapping around 2 of hers. Rachel let her hold on. For the first time since the chaos began, a faint smile tugged at her lips. The descent began. Engines, softened wheels prepared for contact. Runway lights rising like a constellation of safety. When the tires finally struck tarmac, a shudder traveled the cabin, but this time it wasn't fear. It was release. The door opened wide. The night air carried in with the smell of jet fuel and damp concrete. Special forces spread through the cabin, checking on passengers, securing the unconscious terrorists. Cameras flashed from the tarmac. News had spread fast, an American flight hijacked, then saved from the inside. Rachel stepped off last, her bag slung over her shoulder. The little girl waved from her mother's arms, Bunny still clutched tight. Rachel lifted her hand in return, a small gesture, but enough to etch itself into the child's memory forever. The commander walked beside her, his voice low. "You didn't have to step in more. We had a team ready." "They didn't have time," Rachel replied, eyes scanning the tarmac, her stride steady. The passengers watched her go, some clapping, some whispering prayers, others simply staring at the quiet strength they had once ridiculed. In the days that followed, the aftermath unspooled like a second story. News outlets swarmed, social media churned. Clips taken by passengers went viral, but the spotlight did not flatter everyone. The businessman's name, once associated with wealth, became a headline for disgrace. A leaked email showed he tried to spin the story to save his job. It backfired. He was out of the firm within a week. The gold chain executive who had stood against Rachel was demoted, the board citing conduct unbecoming after passengers shared their accounts. Others, too, faced their reflections. The hoodie kid deleted his accounts, friends turning away after he tried to joke about the incident. And the teenage girl with blue hair who had filmed Rachel in disdain posted a tearful apology, her voice shaking as she admitted her mistake. It went viral too, but the comments were divided, some forgiving, others unforgiving. But none of them would ever face Rachel again. They didn't need to. The truth had been revealed at 30,000 feet, and it echoed louder than any defense they could give. Rachel, meanwhile, stayed silent. She walked through the terminal like any other traveler, blending into the current of people dragging suitcases and chasing connections. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. On the tarmac, before disappearing into the night, an older woman in a plain sweater approached her. Her hands were clasped tightly, her eyes wet. "I judged you," she admitted, voice raw. "I thought you didn't care. I was wrong." Rachel paused. The weight of her bag tugged against her shoulder. She met the woman's gaze with quiet gentleness. "It's okay," she said simply, and then she kept walking. Years earlier, at another airport, her father had stood with a hand on her shoulder, his voice rough but warm. "You don't need to prove anything. Just be ready." She had nodded, then her bag packed for her first mission. Now that memory lingered in every step she took. For those who had doubted her, Rachel's silence said everything. For those who had mocked her, her strength was the answer they never expected. And for anyone who has ever been judged, dismissed, or underestimated, her story is more than a thriller in the sky. It is a reminder your strength doesn't need a spotlight. It's there waiting, quiet, steady, enough.